Again, welcome everyone. My name is Jason Blakeburn, and I am a PhD candidate at McGill University and the research assistant for this lecture series. This is the ReOrienting, the global study of religion, history, theory, and society. The Keenan Chair of Interfaith Studies, Professor Armando Salvatore, and the James McGill Professor of Islamic Philosophy, Robert Wisnowski, are pleased to welcome you to our online lecture series. And you can find out more about our series on our website and YouTube channel. The seventh speaker in our series today on March 24th will be Professor Huseyin Yilmaz of George Mason University. The title of the lecture is Patron Saints of the Room and Their Chosen Dynasty, the Story of Ottomans in Sufi Hagiographies. It will be followed by a Q&A, so please hold your questions until then. And we'll stop the recording for that Q&A as well. So let me introduce our speaker today. Professor Huseyin Yilmaz is currently an associate professor in the Department of History and Art History and the research director at the Ali Viral Ak Center for Global Islamic Studies at George Mason University. He received his PhD in 2005 from Harvard University in History and Middle Eastern Studies. From 2005 to 2009, he taught at the Humanities Program and Department of History at Stanford University. From 2009 to 2012, he taught in the Department of History at the University of South Florida. As a research fellow, he spent spring 2010 at Internationales Forschungszentrum Kulturwissenschaften in Vienna. His research interests include political thought, geographic imageries, social movements, and cultural history of the Ottoman Empire and the broader Islamic world of the early modern era. He is the author of Caliphate Redefined, The Mystical Turn in Ottoman Political Thought from Princeton University Press in 2018. And his recent publications include The Eastern Question and the Ottoman Empire, The Genesis of the Near and Middle East in the 19th Century, and from I practiced this, from Serbestiet to Hurriyet, Ottoman Statesmen and the Question of Freedom during the Late Enlightenment. With that, I will turn it over to Professor Yilmaz as we go into our lecture. So please keep your mics muted and hold your questions until the end. Professor Yilmaz.
Thank you so much, Jason. I'm very happy to be here and honored. And my particular thanks to colleagues Armando, Robert, and Aslihan, who made efforts to make this event happen. So today I will talk about how the patron saints of the Rum, Anatolia, and the Balkans became part of the very birth and the evolution of the Ottoman Empire and polity. And I'd like to start with the image that was on the poster, and I will also end with that image. I'm leaving the interpretation of that image to the end, but to begin with, the image here is in the middle. You could see Mevlana Rumi, Jalaluddin Rumi, whirling with his dervishes in Merdevkhane, and here is the poor Seljuk ruler Rukneddin. So the image tells us that Rukneddin disobeyed Rumi's advice. Therefore, he paid it with his life. He was poisoned here. And Mevlana from afar, hearing this incident, he just closes his ears not to hear his agony while he was dying. So it is it's a scene where a sultan, a king, disobeys a saint and pays for his life, and it makes it look like he deserves his death for disobeying the advice of the saint. And I'll talk about this text in the Ottoman context, which was produced in the late 16th century at the end of my talk. Now, when we talk about hagiographies, we are talking about a relatively new development in Islamic cultural history, because the very genre of manaqib Menakıb Names are quite new, and we can trace the origins of those to the 9th century, perhaps, but becoming sort of the memorable stories of saintly deeds in vernacular languages is quite a late development, and really becomes popular, increasingly popular from the 13th century onwards. And Anatolia, or in general, let's say Rome, including Western Anatolia and the Balkans, it becomes increasingly more popular. And especially in the context of Ottoman state, or the Ottomans in general, let's say, hagiographies actually precluded both political and historical writing. So at the Ottoman frontier, in terms of political imageries, in terms of principles of rulership, we first see the genre of hagiographies in which these were expounded rather than political texts per se, or even historical texts per se. So Ottoman chronicles came into being from early 15th century onwards, and the better known chronicles actually were composed only towards the end of the 15th century. And political texts were first started to be composed in Turkish in the beginning of, again, 15th century. But before that, we have Menakıb Names, the hagiographies. But hagiographies, in a sense, also follow this trail because they become increasingly more popular in the 15th and 16th centuries. In fact, many hagiographies of earlier saints who were purported to live in the 13th and 14th centuries were written in 15 and 16 or even later centuries, because it shows that they were basically handed over orally and lived in oral memory and put down in writing in later centuries. So what do we see in these hagiographies? First of all, they were performative texts at the frontier, especially in a context where literacy was very low, and the urbanization was slowly picking up. So especially among the nomadic peoples, we see these texts were composed and transmitted orally and read aloud in gatherings. The language is often very simple in these hagiographies, except the ones who were later on written down in more developed Ottoman language. So these early hagiographies reflect both vernacularism in both language and perhaps more importantly in spirituality. So they're often outside the confines of the more disciplinary learning of Islam represented by madrasas, and madrasas were sprawling in Ottoman cities as well. But these Menakıb Names were outside the confines of these madrasas, even in the case of saints who were tied to madrasas. And in those hagiographies, Sufis were often depicted as rulers, absolute rulers, the ones who combined temporal and spiritual affairs, or vice versa, or rulers as Sufis, especially in cases where the rulers challenged the Sufis' authority. These were the claims by rulers, but of course, by the very virtue of a Menakıb Nama was written, the sheikh, the main character in the Menakıb, was a ruler. Ruler in the sense that he has a divinely mandated authority over both spiritual and temporal realms. There was no distinction in between. So many of these menakibnames are actually replete with encounters between saints and rulers. Rulers who are crossing paths with the saints, sometimes punished by the saints, sometimes disciplined by the saints, sometimes appointed by the saints. But in each of these encounters, they were depicted, especially in early hagiographies, depicted as the higher authority. So they were independent, autonomous authority figures with powers not necessarily manifested in the physical realm, but felt in the physical realm. And we see Western, if you can visualize the 13th and 14th centuries, or in 15th century, Western Anatolia and the Balkans, it was replete with these autonomous Sufi groupings gathered around quite charismatic Sufi figures. Rumi was one of them, Hacı Bektaş was one of them, Sheikh Ahi Evran was one of them, and they were often in competition with each other because they had a very strong sway over their constituencies, and they acted as if they were autonomous entities in competition with one another. And also, in some cases, their teachings also do not overlap with each other, which made them in a competitive mood with one another. Later on, of course, in the 16th century onwards, these Sufi groups became either converged or in their own accounts, they made the originating figures befriended with each other. But we have also ample contemporary evidence that they were often at odds with each other. So Western Anatolia was a place the rulers and Sufi saints were in conflict with each other because they all claim undisputed, undivided authority against one another. And also when they ally with a political figure, it often happens at the expense of others. We now know well that Mevlevis, for example, we don't know, of course, historically what happened because we don't have any documentary evidence for that. But for the first century of the Ottomans, there is no record of Mevlevis actually having any activity within the Ottoman realms, despite the fact that Mevlevis were, especially at the time of Ulu Arif Çelebi, so active all over Anatolia, including like Caucasia and beyond, but not in Ottoman territory. It only came after the Battle of Ankara and the Fetret Devri, and Murat II led the Mevlevis, opened the first Mevlevi Khane arguably in 1420s, and then towards we have Mevlevis becoming closer allied with the Ottoman ruler. But we see quite a few examples of how either Mevlevis or Abdalan pitch alliances with princes in the frontiers, including the Ottomans, Aydinoğlu, Saruhanids, Menteşes, you name it. And the working alliance was that at least tacitly, but in hagiographies very overtly, that the saint actually authorizes a given bey or sultan, and even entitles in many cases, appoints him as the Sultan of Ghazis, for example, or Sultan of the Rum, in exchange for the saint's recognition as the higher authority. So in that case, the word the ruler actually acts as the physical arm of the saint's spiritual authority. Now, I would like to say a few words about the content of hagiographies for our purposes before I delve into how the Ottomans reflect in those hagiographies. One was the truth claim, again in Turkish vernacularism. In many cases, especially Abdalan dervishes, feature in these hagiographies as illiterate people, in the sense that they were ummis which they just cannot recognize the writing. But the claim was that with illiteracy actually creates a direct connection to the prophetic way of knowledge. And they were quite aware that Muhammad was also well known as Ummi. He was illiterate, but doesn't prevent him to be exposed to the highest level of knowledge. So just as that, the corollary was that a Sufi sheikh or an Abdal, by way of actually preventing himself not to be exposed to the learned knowledge, he can bypass all that and then through spiritual ascension could be exposed to all the knowledge he is worthy of. So another kind of Sufi type was best symbolized in the case of Rumi, of course. Rumi was, on the other hand, just exact opposite of Hacı Bektaş, for example, or other, not Hacı Bektaş may not be the best example, but many other Abdals. Rumi had full command of the learned tradition of Islam. And by profession, he was a mudarris in a madrasa. So he was fully engaged in Islamic law and theology. And rather than negating it, on top of it, he still claimed that he was endowed with the kind of knowledge that they claim was irfan. So ilim and irfan were both together in the case of Rumi. However, in the case of Abdalan, their path was only irfan, and ilim was a very low level of knowledge. So this shows us that hagiographies often portray authority on the basis of epistemological competence. So the way these saints were given such sweeping, absolute, combining, unifying authorities was their ability to be exposed to the higher forms of knowledge. So authority comes from that knowledge. That's why both in the Mevlevi tradition and the Abdalan tradition, they don't feel and they don't portray themselves in any way inferior to the ulama. They always retain the claim that they have the higher form of knowledge. A second feature of hagiographies was that in almost all of these hagiographies, we see divine providence or divine appointment or a mandate from the heavens. With a bit of stretch, we can perhaps trace it all the way to Central Asian claims of rulership as something emanates from heavens, because many of these, especially in the Abdalan tradition, the saints claim to be sent with a specific purpose by Ahmed Yesevi. So Ahmet Yesevi was a patron saint of everything, as it appears. And many of these Anatolian Sufis now claim they were sent specifically with the mission of expanding the name of God, to educate and spiritually guide people in the land of Rome. So it's sort of Rome was given to them as a promised land. They were destined. They were sent with a specific purpose to the very Rome. So that made them very spiritually attached to the Rome by a divine mission. So they don't acquire their positions. They come with that mandate. And then a third feature was, for our purposes, we see frequent compacts with temporal rulers. In almost all cases, temporal rulers acknowledge the higher status or authority of these saints in return for recognition as simply sultans, right? And then these sheikhs or Sufis or Abdals still retain their unified authority of both temporal and spiritual powers, whereas the sultans simply exercise, they become instrumental in the realization of their temporal powers. Here, I would like to unpack the caliphate a little bit, because the very notion of the caliphate also becomes increasingly more pronounced and explained and redefined in Sufistic texts, including hagiographies. So in the standard word in at least Sunni theology and juristic works was imam, and caliphate was mostly used in historical and philosophical sources. As a political authority, it becomes redefined, rediscovered, and increasingly more dealt with in the hagiographies, and which now consider caliphate, true caliphate. They distinguish it from all other forms of caliphate, which may be claimed by the world rulers or defined in the books of the external knowledge, or Zahir ulama, or Zahir. So as opposed to that, they claim true caliphate combines the three authorities of the prophet, which were wilaya, nubuwa, and sultana, and they all point one way or another the crisis or dividedness or fragmentation since the death of the prophet, who was supposed to have combined all these three natures and authorities, but afterwards, depends on the Sufi tariqa, early caliphs combined them in themselves. For Ali, for example, only Ali recombined them. For others, Abu Bakr, Omar, Osman also. But after that, it was simply fragmented. The ulama picked up the nubuwa nature of the prophet, saints, wilaya, and then were the rulers, the sultana. But that's not ideal. That's not how the caliphate materializes. For the caliphate to materialize, one has to combine all these authorities, and the claim was that a given saint in these hagiographies actually have these authorities. Now, as I said, hagiographies preclude political and historical writings. In the meantime, those political and historical writings that came up in the Ottoman context also had a close engagement or negotiation, so to speak, with this hagiographic literature, in the sense that we see the Ottoman Sultan was depicted more and more like a saint in Ottoman historical literature and even official expositions of Ottomans themselves. Just like those saints were depicted more and more with the royal titulature in their own hagiographies. It's very interesting that from the very early on, including Aflaki's and Elvan Çelebi's hagiographies, the main characters were always depicted as Hudavendigar or Hunkar or some. These are very lofty royal titles for the saints. And these manaqib-names, of course, once they were put into writing, there were multiple renditions in time, in later centuries, on the basis of different social and political realities. So they continuously reworked their past, or how these founding figures, saints, were perceived or presented themselves at the time. And I'll give you a good example of it at the end of it. And then we see three major types vis-a-vis the Ottomans. One was the sheikh or the saint as absolute ruler, whereas the sultan in service of the saint. And we see that in Elvan Çelebi's. Elvan Çelebi doesn't necessarily talk about the Ottomans, but in Elvan Çelebi's characterization, the worldly rulers were servants of the saint. We see that in Aflaki as well. We see that in Abdal Musa as well. And most conspicuously, we see that in Osman Baba. Now, Osman Baba is a well-known wilayatname, has multiple encounters with Mehmet II. In each case, he reminds with some disciplinary measure and lesson that he is a real Baba. Baba, of course, here means he equates Baba with caliphate and the absolute authority, and he makes ample claim that at this age, the very prophethood, nubuwwah, was to be carried out through wilayah, sainthood. So the real authority was vested in the sainthood, which doesn't have to be visible or manifest. It just needs to be acknowledged, because through a variety of different plots, he makes it very clear that the real authority, the true authority, is vested with Osman Baba, whereas Mehmet II, after all of these encounters, feels himself obliged to recognize the Baba as the higher authority. Because in those hagiographies, we also see ample scenes of destruction. The very Aflaki, for example, starts his hagiography with Bahavelet coming from Khorasan. On the way, he is destroying dynasties, including the Abbasids. So he's cursing the Abbasids goes down. In Elvan Çelebi's account of Baba İlyas, we see Muhlis Pasha actually single-handedly, with the help of Hızır, alayhi salam, a prophet, brings down the Seljuk rulership because the Seljuk ruler defies his authority. But at the end, these figures also do not and never act as a ruler per se. So they never get coronated as a sultan because they always despise it. It's something they have authority over, but they don't identify themselves as sultan. And Muhlis Pasha's example is very interesting in that regard. He actually defeats the Seljuk sultan and then sits on his throne for a while, and then just retreats, goes back to his village in Çorum with his authority, meaning that world sultans still should act with recognition of his higher authority. A second type was the sultan as absolute ruler, and the saint was in the service of the sultan. Now that was a slow development, mostly engineered with the development of Ottoman courtly culture and Ottoman bureaucracy and the number of intellectuals increasing around Ottoman sultans, especially after Murad Bey II. So we see certain hagiographies actually portray the Sultan as the highest authority, and then the saints as his helpers. One example was Mahmud Pasha. Mahmud Pasha again was portrayed as a saintly figure, but he was a vizier of Mehmed II. Even Vilayetname of Hacı Bektaş, which was composed at the behest of the very Ottomans. He was composed during the reign of Bayezid II, and arguably by Abdullah Ilahi, who was closely associated with the Ottoman rulership. And Hacı Bektaş actually becomes one of the assistant saints, helpers of the Ottoman dynasty. There is a famous coronation story in Hacı Bektaş's Menakıbname, in which he actually sees miraculously sees the future of Osman and actually blesses him for the occasion and then recognizes him as the future ruler. And then even Sheikh Bedrettin, who actually rebelled against the Ottomans, and Sheikh Bedrettin's Menakıbname also was written under the auspices of the Ottomans. So these were, regardless of historical realities, the conflict these saints had with worldly rulers made like a symbiotic relationship in those Menakıbnamas. The third feature was, or for third type, was a shared rulership. In all of these types, there is some form of sharing, of course, but in certain Menakıbnamas makes it a lot more clear and overt. In this case, there is a patron saint who is a protector, helper, versus the friends of God's friends. So the Ottoman ruler was a friend of God's friends, and those God's friends in return support or ally with the Ottoman ruler. And of course, the most important of those were Akşemseddin's and Eşrefoğlu, who were actually part of the very Ottoman ruling establishment during Mehmed II. And in both of these saints' Menakib names, we see almost a carbon copy of the same story, in which case the young Mehmed II actually goes to the sheikh and says that he would like to renounce all authority because in the present, as long as the sheikh is there, he's not the one who should be carrying that authority. The true authority is with the saint. And again, none of these saints in the Menakib stories, except that they say, no, your place is there. You will rule as a sultan. But the fact that the sultan comes forward to a saint in acknowledgement of their higher authority, with the willingness to renounce his position, creates the baseline of this alliance, which actually created a working paradigm all the way into 20th century. I remember in 1990s, there had been a big debate in brackets, talking in Turkish politics, whether the real authority was with the then leader of an Islamist party or his sheikh. There was a big debate. At the end, the sheikh lost and had to leave Turkey, went to Australia, etc. But throughout the Ottoman history, that was something emphasized, that at least tacitly now there is the sheikh who has the authority as a supporter, the succor of the dynasty, and then the friend of an Ottoman Sultan as a friend of that saint. So those imageries then became intermingled. Popular histories written by the Ottomans in divans, in poetry, in epics, the Ottoman Sultan was increasingly depicted with imbued sophistic imageries and vocabularies. And it goes through those three major types, and it trickles into the very Ottoman historical writing as well. And we should not forget here that the sort of the master chronicle of Ottoman history by Ashik Pashazadeh was called Menakib. The geography of, if geography is a good translation of Menakib, of course, the geography of the Ottoman house. Now, of course, these are again picked up by many other chronicles, but three examples here suffice to show. In Ashik Pashazadeh, for example, the beginning story of the Ottomans, which again repeated by many other anonymous Ottoman histories, in which Ertuğrul, in some cases Osman, was portrayed as an illiterate person, just like those Abdalan sheikhs we see in hagiographies. So he becomes a guest of one of the frontier Abdals, and then out of his respect to the Quran, he sees a dream. In the dream, you know, the tree of life springs from his stomach, as miraculously the Ottoman Empire was born. And all of these have very strong sophistic underpinnings, and of course it symbolizes the alliance between a worthy ruler and the sophistic saint Edebali and Ertuğrul. When Ibn Kemal's history tells similar stories, including the one that Osman Bey's rulership was predicted by some Barak Baba, again a very close alliance between frontier dervish saints and rulers. And Bitlisi, of course, the most illustrious author of Ottoman dynasty, actually solidifies these mystical origins or connections or depictions of the Ottomans. He actually argues that the Ottomans, the authority of the Ottomans, goes back to the Prophet via spiritual genealogy. And that's also very much influenced by Sufistic imageries, because authority in jurisprudence comes from Qurayshi lineage. So in order to become a legitimate imam, you have to belong to the Qurayshi lineage. Of course, some jurists said it doesn't apply at all times, but in the mainstream, that's the way. Even in the juristic and theological books in Ottoman madrasas, it would still say one of the conditions of the imam has to be his belonging to the Qurayshi tribe. But Sufis bypass that. The Sufis, many of them coming from non-Arab stock, they created a wholly different genealogy of themselves. And every Sufi saint, of course, who's heading a tariqah, has that genealogy of authorization, the handing over of that license of being spiritually sophisticated. So from Prophet to Abu Bakr, and then either Abu Bakr or Ali to two tariqas goes, and then all the usually known saints, down to the saint at work. These create spiritual genealogies. So through that genealogy, they actually inherit the very authority they are claiming, which is the caliphate and the wilaya, which predicates the caliphate. Just like that, Bitlisi says the Ottomans actually have that nasabi manavi, tracing their authority all the way to the Prophet. Now, I would like to go back to the image that I showed in the beginning of the talk and tell you a bit more about the story of it, which gives us a better idea of how sophistic imageries were imbued with Ottoman visions of rulership by the 16th century. Now, this was produced late 16th century, 1590s. This is an abridgment of Aflaki's hagiography of Rumi, Sawaqib al-Manaqib, by some Mahmud Dede, who was a Mevlevi sheikh in the Ottoman Empire at the time. And the reason it creates, this text was created because it's a very unusual text. First, it is an abridgment. Why would you abridge a manaqib, and on what basis? One question. The second is it very generously illustrated. It's again very unusual for a hagiography. And then it was presented to the Sultan, and another copy was made for the successor of that Sultan. So two copies made, one for Murat III and one for Mehmet III. And it was a project on the part of the Mahmud Dede to resolve the then brewing crisis in the relations between the Ottoman house and the Mevlevis. Actually, just before that, in the beginning of the century, in 1530s and 40s, it was the golden age of Ottoman Mevlevi relations during the during those decades, some more than 12 Mevlevi Khanas were opened all across the empire, including Baghdad, Cairo, you name it. So the outer stretches of the empire were now seeing the spread of Mevlevis in alliance with the Ottomans. But at this time around, the Ottoman rulership actually interfered with the Mevlevi tariqa and ousted the then sheikh of the Mevlevis. It is, again, a very unusual practice in any Muslim polity. We see precedent, again, in the Ottoman Empire, which the Ottomans actually interfered with the Bektashi succession before that. But that was then resolved. Now, the Mevlevis were quite disfavored by the Ottoman dynasty, and their endowments were also being, there was a risk of being appropriated by the Ottoman center. So Mahmud Dede, most likely with a special mission, he was sent to Istanbul from Konya, and then presented the Sultan the abridgment of Rumi's, of Aflaki's hagiography with profusely illustrated copies. And then somehow he gets the attention of the Sultan, and then the Sultan accepts this request of being restored the Mevlevi post in Konya with 3 conditions. So Mahmud Dede simply asked the Sultan for the restoration of Mevlevi Sheikh in Konya, and the Sultan's answer was with 3 conditions. One was, he asked, tell your Sheikh in Konya to pray for me so that, 1, Turan and Iran be my servants. So I want full authority over Turks and Persians, so to speak. Second, I would like to become pole of the poles, Sadr Nishini Aktab. And third, I would like to unify both temporal and spiritual powers, very overtly. Suri ve manevi tasarruf kudreti, I would like to have. So these 3 requests he passed to Mahmud Dede, and Mahmud Dede said, of course, we will pray for that. So it's very interesting here that on the one hand, the Ottoman Sultan has the authority, obviously, to oust or even confiscate the property of a Mevlevi sheikh or saint. At the end, he also asks to acquire certain powers from that saint. So despite the fact that he is aiming to achieve absolute authority, including temporal and spiritual powers and becoming pole of the poles, yet he's asking Mevlevi Sheikh's help or intercession to acquire those powers. But in the meantime, of course, Mahmud Dede accepts this request, but at the same time, the text, including this image, gives very subtle message to the Ottoman Sultan, actually, who holds the reign still. In the image, you see the Sultan is actually being killed for disobeying the Sheikh. And one of the most illustrated stories in this abridged geography was Rumi's encounter with Alauddin, and Alauddin was the most powerful Seljuk ruler. In that encounter, Alauddin actually renounces his rulership and asks Rumi to take over. And then at some point, Mahmud Dede also interjects a very interesting point, and he says, only the Ottomans and Mevlevis in the world are entitled to be Hudavendigar. So there is no one else in the world who can claim the title of Hudavendigar, which means well-born king in the Persian language. So this text and its illustrations show that the Ottoman rulership and saintly authority became inseparably enmeshed. So even though the Ottoman Sultan, especially in the case of Murad III, could claim such lofty authorities, he cannot do that at the expense of the Mevlevi saint of the time, and still asks his help or authorization to acquire those titles. So I'd like to stop here. Thank you very much for your patience, especially at the time of Zoom fatigue.
Wonderful. Thank you for Professor Yilmaz. That was really enlightening. And so I would like to say thank you again, Professor Yilmaz, for presenting today. Thank you again to our co-conveners for starting our series and continuing with us. And thank you to all of you, our attendees who've come to these faithfully. It's great to see some names, familiar faces and names, and then some new ones as well. So we can't do these without all of you, and it's great that even amidst Zoom fatigue, we can reach so many people around the world. With that, I would like to remind people that we have one more speaker coming up in our series, and that's going to be in a few weeks on April 14th, but at a different time. So that's going to be at 9:30 a.m. Montreal time or Eastern Daylight Time. And that will be with Professor Alatas and talking about Ibn Khaldun and autonomous knowledge production. Again, April 14th and at a different time so we could get more to us, we could accommodate that schedule around the world. But with that, I will stop our recording and we will open it up for questions.